I'm here with Emily Kopp, and she's a Senior Investigative Reporter at the Daily Caller. And we're going to just talk about the Senate hearings that just took place with Anthony Fauci, Dr. Anthony Fauci, and his diaries, and just what's going on with the whole thing related to COVID. It's been a strange 6 years since COVID started, and you've been reporting on this for a while. You've been looking into where COVID came from and the origins of COVID, and you reported on the hearings a little bit. So I had to turn off the Senate hearings because I couldn't handle it anymore. And there is a rule in this podcast: you are not allowed to plead the fifth when I ask you questions. You're not allowed to do that. So because that's the only thing that Fauci did the entire time, is he pleaded the fifth. So I guess let's just back up a little bit, though. What people don't follow this stuff, and so what were the Senate hearings about?
Well, first of all, Andy, I'm so gratified that you were also furious because when I got back to the office, back to the newsroom to report out my stories, my colleagues were like, "Aren't you gratified? Like, aren't you satisfied that vindicated in all your reporting, the fact that he couldn't even answer questions?" And I was furious. I was speechless that he doesn't even feel a sense of responsibility to provide clarity and answers to the American public that paid his salary for decades and decades.
Yes.
So yeah, I mean, I was there in Dirksen, the Senate office building where the, Homeland Security and Government Affairs Committee that Paul chairs does its hearings. And I almost caused a disturbance because when he started pleading the fifth, I just started swearing and had my head in my hands, couldn't believe it. A lot of people predicted, because in prior depositions, he has frequently, said that he didn't recall or declined to answer in some other way. But I never in my wildest dreams would have predicted that he would have repeatedly declined to answer, citing, his rights against self-incrimination. That was a big shocker for me.
They asked him what color the floor was, and he pled the fifth. What color tie is he wearing? I mean, it wasn't even for things that had anything to do with COVID. It was just everything the whole time. Oh, it's so annoying. He's such a little prick. Yeah.
Yeah, because the narrative, I guess, is that, well, anything I say will be used against me, so I'm just going to decline to answer at all.
Yeah.
I don't think that's a good enough answer given the questions, or good enough posture given the questions that are hanging over his head right now, including, did his hubris lead to millions of people's lives being completely upended? It's just not acceptable. So I was angry. I started swearing, not acting with the decorum you're expected to act with when you're in a Senate office building. But yeah, I mean, so you asked what the hearings were about.
Yes.
Senator Paul has been like a dog on a bone with Anthony Fauci. He was seeing through his falsehoods very early on, but unfortunately didn't have control of the Senate committee because the Republicans didn't have the Senate until the 2024 elections, and wasn't able to, with a Senate gavel, when you're the chairman, you can subpoena records, and you can, as he did with Fauci, compel testimony from the witnesses that you want to hear from. So that's why a lot of these new records, including Tony Fauci's diary, are coming out now because for, the last year and a half or so, he has had that subpoena power and knows this story very well and knows where the bodies are buried. And he's got Kennedy at HHS, who was actually helping him get down to the bottom of it. A lot of times, if you're a member of Congress and you're trying to apply oversight to the executive branch and you're trying to get records from a federal agency, that federal agency will find ways to a source of mine yesterday described it as bureaucratic guerrilla warfare, find reasons and ways to obstruct getting you the documents that you actually want to see. But with Kennedy at the helm, they were able to be really innovative and get Fauci's diaries even. So
where did they come from, the diaries?
My understanding from what I've seen in the reporting is that he wrote them on government servers. And I don't know how they were able to extract that data, but you have a lot of really smart people who were installed at HHS at the beginning of the administration with Doge. And my guess is that one of those people who are not swamp creatures were installed from Silicon Valley or whatever during that early Doge period was able to help out with that.
I liked what Rand Paul's team did with it when they put it out on the internet. They had all these like little doodles on the side of them, and it said like "keep out, don't read." I thought that was funny.
Yeah, absolutely. But it's not really a diary, right? Like,
right.
Which I point out just because there's been some pushback about the propriety of publishing someone's innermost thoughts in their diary. This wasn't really that. I think this was someone who was persuaded for decades and decades and decades that they were going to be a figure of historical importance. That's and that every single interaction that they had was worth, memorializing in his diary so that eventually he would be able to write a memoir, which he actually was doing when COVID first hit, and that historians would have access to this, great scientist. But this whole story has been really remarkable because it's a global cover-up of the cause of millions of deaths, and sort of the principal person we're interested in kept meticulous notes, which is very rare, especially in modern day when so much of our communication is over text or phone or whatever. And I can talk about this more, but the clique of virologists that he used to promote the wet market theory and point away from the Wuhan Institute also kept meticulous notes of their cover up, basically their conspiracy to conceal the actual origin of the virus, which was a lab leak, via these internal Slack messages to each other. Very candid thoughts. Yeah, over Slack. So we have a really meticulous, thorough written record of this massive global conspiracy. And I can't think of another, investigative story that has that treasure trove to it. So,
yeah, I found it, one, just angering as I read through, and I haven't read much of the diaries, but as I read through the guy, I think you're right. I think he was totally convinced that they were going to write books and make movies about him and stuff. And he couldn't spell properly. And it's sort of, I don't know. He's kind of it is hubris. It's just pride. This is what happens. I mean, the Bible verse, pride cometh before the fall. You could tell that he really thought that he was on top of the world and that he was ready for this moment. He was ready for COVID and he wanted this to be his defining moment. And it's just, I mean, the irony in it is that he did a horrible job, and he honestly is one of the worst health officials in the history of the world. So I want to know, how much of the diary have you read?
I've read a good bit. I saw a lot of the reporting about his embarrassing, self-adulation, which is interesting to me. I think he is a really interesting character study. I often, in reporting on this story, have wondered to what degree did he believe his own hype? Because I knew from reading the internal emails that he simultaneously understood that his institute had shipped funding and controversial high-risk coronavirus virology to the epicenter of the pandemic in Wuhan, and that he had for years advocated for this high-risk virology, and said it was worth the risk of a man-made pandemic. Here we are. There's a pandemic. It sure as hell looks man-made. To what degree did that sink in? even amid all of the media adulation. My read of the diary is that it didn't sink in very much, or that he was able to ride the high of his own media hype without doing deep reflection on the fact that he might have caused the very pandemic that they were praising him for responding to. So that all is very interesting to me, but actually, as someone who has reported on the nitty-gritty of it and gotten really in the weeds on the origins question, I actually gravitated more towards, okay, so what is the hard data that we're getting from these entries about where COVID came from, which is why in my coverage, I focused a bit on a couple of things. One, that Fauci had learned from China CDC Director George Gao that the wet market was not the origin very early on.
Yeah, that was in January. I mean, not that they had necessarily learned, it wasn't definitive, but as you read it, it was like, this is a conversation. They're discussing, that this is probably somehow tampered with or man-made or something like that. And it didn't come from the wet markets in January. And they ran the story for years that it was from the wet markets. Anyways, you can go ahead. That just drove me crazy reading that. Some of the stuff I just had to stop reading because I was like, I'm just getting angry and I can't do anything about it. So
I so relate to that. I completely relate. It's worth drilling down probably on that point. So just to give you a sense of the timeline, in that early January period, there was a time when even reporters like John Cohen, who's a reporter at Science Magazine, who later called people who reported on the lab leak theory crazy, were saying the wet market is not actually the source of this thing. I think it quickly became apparent, like, oh gosh, this virus has signs of engineering.
Yes.
There's this coronavirus lab in the middle of Wuhan. We better come up with a cover story. The wet market is our best bet. And so that's when they coalesced around the wet market. But for an early time, you were allowed to say the truth, which is that it wasn't the wet market, and actually the epidemiology and the molecular clock of the virus itself, how it evolved genetically, pointed to an earlier outbreak. And that's what George Gao said. He said that, and this is in Fauci's diaries, he told Fauci that the authorities in Wuhan had lied to him, and that he was devastated because what he had communicated to his colleagues around the world was that this was an isolated thing, that we take out the pangolins or raccoon dogs or whatever that has this virus from this wet market. We tell people to stay away from the wet market. We sanitize it and pandemic's over. That's sort of how SARS went. SARS wasn't very infectious, so they were able to contain it pretty quickly once they identified the infected animals. That wasn't the case here, as it turns out. He had misled a lot of people, and this, the cat was out of the bag. And he said this publicly, and risked his reputation. He was someone who had supported, much like Fauci, this idea that you could find viruses in nature and soup them up in the lab and come up with countermeasures to prevent pandemics. So he took a lot of risks to say this out loud. I think it's a good counterexample to Fauci's cowardice. George Gao said it out loud. He has a lot more to risk politically. And, the Chinese government is not afraid to kidnap and kill people who are political dissidents. We don't do that in this country, but Fauci couldn't.
I mean,
well, it's another discussion.
Go ahead.
But so Fauci had a lot less to risk. He was mostly risking the fawning media coverage and his own self-conception as this hero and the most credible scientist of all time, or whatever he said in his diary. And he was
science. He is the science.
Right. Exactly.
It's crazy. Go ahead.
Just one more thing on the science of the wet market. So a lot of the papers that came out subsequently by Fauci's favorite virologist saying it's this wet market rely on the epidemiology. How many of those early cases have a direct tie to the wet market? But we know from Fauci's diary that George Gao was telling him by January, February 2020, the Wuhan authorities lied to me about these cases being connected to the wet market. And so there's a great deal of ascertainment bias in that early data that is not accounted for by the virologists who pushed the wet market theory.
Right. Can you talk a little bit about like gain of function research and how these things have been genetically modified through, I guess, the history? Because a lot of people, I've been surprised just talking to people about COVID and over the last couple of years that people don't actually know what any of this stuff means, like that we can genetically modify and create viruses and make things like people don't understand like what's going on in these labs that are in Wuhan. I think there is a gain of function research lab in Madison, Wisconsin. I'm like pretty sure. I might be wrong about that, but what is that? And because that all precedes COVID, but I think it obviously, like you're saying, plays a role. So Fauci was involved in funding gain of function research. Is that correct?
That's absolutely correct. And I think one of the great values of the hearing on Wednesday was that Senator Paul sort of went into the recent history of this and how central Fauci's advocacy was to that. And you're right, there absolutely is a gain of function lab in Madison, Wisconsin. I actually wish I had known that's where you were at before our conversation. I would have prepared a little more, but
no, that's fine.
There have been very controversial experiments in your backyard. I regret to inform you.
Like what? Do you know any off the top of your head right now?
So I think
this is going to confirm whether or not we need to sell our house and look at a different state. So there you go.
Yeah, I have the same thought sometimes about Frederick, Maryland, which is where
Madison, UW is. Say that again.
I have the same thought about, I'm in DC, suburban DC, like on the Maryland side. And sometimes I'm like, Frederick seems nice, but then I remember that Fort Detrick is there. I'm like, I don't know.
Yeah, everywhere is messed up. Yeah, what are they doing here? Because I can imagine that the UW, they're doing a lot of. The UW Madison is a strange place, and it's a place that people think like nothing's going on there. But some of the worst philosophies and psychological ideas have come out of UW Madison, and it seems like now some of the worst biological ideas and things are coming out of Madison. And so, have you looked it up?
Yeah, so I just wanted to double check that I wasn't misremembering this. But so those experiments that Rand Paul mentioned in the hearing on Wednesday, where they souped up high path avian influenza. So H5N1, it is estimated to be like 50% fatal. So half of the people who are infected with this thing would die is the prediction.
Okay.
So some of that work was done in the Netherlands by this guy, Ron Fouchier, who he mentioned. But they were also done at the University of Wisconsin-Madison by this guy, Yoshiro Kawaioka. I'm probably mispronouncing that. But these two collaborators were responsible for one of the initial gain-of-function research experiments with this high-path avian influenza. Basically, they did serial passage in ferrets that have respiratory systems that are similar to humans, which caused the virus to evolve changes that allowed it to be airborne. So think about an airborne virus that would kill 50% of the people who got it. That would be catastrophic, right? Apocalyptic.
That's what we're doing here in Madison. That's
what you were doing in 2012.
Is that what you're saying?
So that's what you guys were doing. I won't.
It looks like he's still at the university, though.
These guys did not have their careers ended for doing these experiments that a cartoon villain I think up. They in fact have only kind of gained fame and probably more government grants from that work. So Rand Paul talked a little bit about those experiments. He talked about the fact that Fauci really went to bat for those guys when it generated a lot of concern among biosecurity-minded epidemiologists who were like, hold on a second, maybe we shouldn't be publishing how-to manuals on how to make extremely catastrophic bioweapon. He wrote this op-ed in the Washington Post. The headline is "A Flu Risk Worth Taking," where he said the risk of a man-made pandemic is worth it because of the promises of this gain-of-function research technology. To my understanding, I've gotten some pushback from Angela Rasmussen on Twitter about this. My understanding is that we don't have any major countermeasures, no major medical advancements from those experiments that were, nearly 15 years ago now. So people can come to their own judgments about whether it's a flu risk worth taking to risk a lab escape of a catastrophically fatal airborne virus if we don't get any countermeasures from those experiments.
That is literally one of the questions I was going to ask you is what are the upsides to this? And that's one thing that I've wondered for a long time. I'm not a scientist or anything. I don't understand any of this stuff, but it doesn't seem like if the options are 50% of people who get this die, or like what is the other, like what is the positive that comes out of this? Because I've been wanting to know like what is happening at these labs, these research labs, other than them tampering with organisms. Like what's the purpose? What's the goal? Are there any objectives that they're aiming for?
I think if you ask a gain-of-function virologist, they say that this is important basic research that may have unpredictable benefits, but like 10 years, 20 years, 30 years down the line, this knowledge that we gain from doing this basic research can help with vaccines and drugs. I think I think maybe some of it is motivated by that idea, but I do think that is a little bit of a cover story for the actual biodefense purpose, which is that we think that China might be mucking around with viruses. We think Iran might be mucking around with viruses, so we need to muck around with viruses too. Yeah. And so then you get this arms race basically in viruses. Mm-hmm. And I'm actually doing some reporting on that right now. Something that not a lot of people noticed during the hearing is that Senator Paul entered into the congressional record something about a tie between the CIA and the NIH.
Yes.
So happy to talk more about that. But
yes,
I think basically the virologists who are doing gain-of-function research, some of them might be working on undisclosed contracts for the intelligence community. And this is not unusual, right? So like, as long as the National Academy of Sciences has existed, it has advised the US government on scientific questions. Yeah. And back when we had a explicit offensive biological weapons program in the 50s and 60s, the NIS was a big part of the initiation of that. And if you read Chris Newby's book on Lyme disease and tick-borne outbreaks being potentially connected to the U.S. biological weapons program, she talks about that. And I think that continues to this day. It's not an explicitly offensive program, but one of the documents that have been declassified in recent weeks is a CIA memo, and the title of the memo is "The Darker Bioweapons Future." Isn't that spooky?
Yeah, well, what are we doing? I just want to say real quick before you go into that, because that sounds horrible and we're just going to go through it. But the idea that somebody can just say, hey, the reason for this gain of function research that could like wipe out 50% of people who get the viruses that we're tampering with or whatever, like the positives are apparently in 30 years, this is going to be helpful. That is, you've got to be an idiot to actually believe, like you have to be stupid to fund that. That is the dumbest thing ever. And I don't think that it's like, I don't think that these people are stupid. Fauci might be stupid. He cannot spell. I will just say, as I read that, he could not spell. So I think he might be
wrong too. It's like, we're not in 2019 anymore, buddy.
What a freak. Yeah. Get the dates right. Yeah. He spelled Kobe Bryant wrong. Like, Kobe Bryant's one of the best basketball players ever, man. So anyways, You got to get that right. Anyways, the idea that you're going to do that is you're going to get this vague, anytime that something is sort of like shrouded with the vague description of like, yeah, in 30 years, this is going to be helpful. It's like, that's probably a lie. That's probably not what it's for. So that sort of stuff drives me crazy because all organizations and institutions do that. You ask them a specific question. What is this money for? What is this research for? And they give some dumb, vague answer. And then everybody kind of turns a blind eye to it. It's like, oh yeah, that sounds good. And then we have a pandemic. So that's just crazy. Anyway, go into the CIA file, which sounds horrible. So,
well, I think you're spot on to flag that. I think that's an important issue here. And it's why I wish the Trump administration was being bolder on NIH reform, because right now, the NIH is like really, really ineffective at giving us return on investment. We're spending billions and billions of dollars, taxpayers, to the NIH, and presumably we get some benefit at the other end of that. But there are, I think, a lot of institutes within the sort of NIH complex that are not giving us a good return on investment at all. And I don't even know that anyone's really checking, because what happens is that pharma, which gets really cheap R&D from NIH funding, will go to Congress and say, we need you to give NIH more money. And so members of Congress can do something that pharma likes, but also say, like, aren't we so great for curing cancer by giving NIH lots and lots and lots of money? And whenever you try to
last time I checked, people are still dying from cancer.
Well, so that's exactly really right. Like, we're sort of not allowed to ask in DC, like, how is the NIH doing? Because as soon as you cancel any grant, the media is up in arms about how this particular research was like just on the cusp of curing cancer or Alzheimer's. And this,
as if they haven't already cured it. I'm not a major conspiracy theorist, but I actually probably am now. I don't think it's a conspiracy theorist, half these things. I think these things are just true, but like, I wouldn't doubt that they've already cured it and they're just holding it back. I think that you have to question the presupposition of these agencies. The idea that it's going to be beneficial, you have to ask towards what end, because it's obviously, as far as I understand, at least for the 2010s, it was toward the end of like getting rid of human beings because the climate god is mad, and apparently we need to get rid of, and we need to get rid of people because people are causing a carbon footprint or whatever their stupid story, their religious story is. And so they've got to sacrifice more people to the climate god who's mad at them. And that's what the purpose of these agencies are. Sorry to just throw that in out of nowhere. That's what I think it is.
No, I mean, we are inundated with bullshit science, and it's really, really concerning, whether it's climate science or Alzheimer's research, which has basically been run by a cabal of fraudsters for years. And with cancer research, it's just like the incentives are all kind of away from a real solution and towards really incremental, marginal fixes that biotech can seize on and make a lot of money from. That's the way I see it as a total layperson, by the way, just as someone who has reported on these issues for a long time. It seems like, all of the incentives point away from real good breakthroughs. But so on the CIA.
Yes. Transition to the CIA. It's going to get, I want to know about this though, because this is something I think you've reported a little bit on, just the CIA and how they've been involved in this. And it just feels like the CIA is like they're involved in everything. And so that's concerning. But two, it's like, if the CIA was involved in, it sounds like they are involved in one, trying to figure out the origins of COVID, and that's important. I'd like to know what they found to be true. So anyways, what did you find here?
Yeah, and the CIA, I think, like any government agency, is big, and there are people who stuck their necks out and were saying, hey, Anthony Fauci, this looks like important intel, and probably were retaliated against for that.
Yeah.
There's also this other CIA angle that I've been reporting on lately, and it relates to the fact that this gain of function research stuff seems so wacky and risky, and that it doesn't seem like we get real medical countermeasures from it. So, what is it actually? And one of the documents that Senator Paul declassified with Tulsi Gabbard's help is a November 2003 memo called The Darker Bioweapons Future, in which it recounts a meeting between the CIA and the National Academy of Sciences, where this National Academy of Sciences group says nuclear weapons is fairly easy to detect, right? Because it requires this resource-intensive enrichment. It's easy for rival nations to say, hey, that's not up to IAEA code, you better stop that.
Right.
With bioweapons, it's a lot harder to detect. It can be done in a lab. It can be obscured as civilian research. So how do we, as the United States, make sure that our adversaries are not developing bioweapons that could pose a threat to American national security? What they proposed, the National Academies of Sciences proposed to the CIA, was creating a I'm forgetting the exact word that they used, but a web of informants where, outwardly civilian scientists would develop these contacts at labs abroad and conferences abroad and would act as informants for the intelligence agencies. And a CIA whistleblower who testified to Senator Rand Paul's committee a few weeks ago said in his testimony that this partnership between the intelligence community and virologists had incentivized riskier research. So if you're trying to gain intel on a Chinese lab and you're trying to get an in with that Chinese lab, you might share really sensitive IP with that Chinese lab to try to get your foot in the door. And so a big mystery for me, even as someone who has covered this story closely, is why would we work with a maximum security lab in China, a country that, is not an ally? And this document from 2003 detailing the CIA's strategy on collecting intelligence on possible biological weapons, I think is a window into a potential answer that maybe we were doing these experiments to collect intelligence. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. I think it's annoying at the very least. I got to think about it a little bit more. It's just annoying. Well, and this is the question that I guess I'm just trying to figure out right now is, in 2003, I was 3, so I had no idea what was going on, 3 or 4, obviously. So was any of this in the news? Did people know that? Did they know about biological warfare and these sorts of things that were happening, gain of function, like these ideas and where we were progressing toward? I feel like the 90s and 2000 and 2010, everybody was sort of in a daze, and we got iPhones and stuff, and TVs were getting better, and everybody's like, this is awesome. And then all of a sudden the 2010s rolled into the 2020s, and it's just an explosion of all the consequences of everything that was happening during those decades. Obviously it goes further back into the 60s and even further, but was this a mainstream conversation back then? I don't know if you know. I mean, you were young then too. So do you know?
Yeah, not quite as young as you, unfortunately, but yeah, I'm really glad you asked about the historical context.
Sure.
So the basic answer is no. No one knew about this because it was a classified CIA memo, and it's only really because of the dogged pursuit of Senator Paul and Tulsi Gabbard that we're seeing this thing. So nobody knew, but there was simultaneously to this pivot towards a more aggressive posture on biodefense in the intelligence community, a more aggressive pivot to biodefense within the Pentagon that was public. And in fact, this is a really important part of Fauci's origin story. So Fauci's growth in power and influence is really tied to Dick Cheney, interestingly.
Yes. Yeah.
So
right.
November 2003, what else happened in that year? First of all, the Human Genome Project finished. So that was the NIH's push to sequence the entire human genome that wrapped up earlier. That's the spring of that year. So there is this explosion in our ability to sequence, which is wonderful for medical advancement, but is also threatening in terms of the potential for bioweapons. What else happened that year? We invade Iraq. Why do we invade Iraq? Because
they have nukes.
Not just nukes, Andy, also biological weapons of mass destruction. At least that was what Judy Miller told us. Of course, we now know that was complete bunk. But at the time that there was this push from President Bush and Vice President Cheney to surge funding for biodefense and put Fauci at the head of that surge, the American people at large were not yet privy to the fact that Iraq did not, at the time that we invaded, have biological weapons. But that's what was showing up on page 1 of the New York Times. So that incentivized a lot of this pivot from Fauci's institute is purely about infectious diseases to it's also about preparation for bioweapons.
Where did that intel come from? I don't know all the details of these things, but where did the intel come from that Iraq had biological weapons?
Judy Miller was talking to a lot of expats who had a real stake in regime change in Iraq. Yeah. And were willing to lie to get to that conclusion. And she's every journalist's worst nightmare for that reason. Nobody wants to end up, with a mistake that catastrophic.
Well, so. Yeah. So Fauci, so this, I mean, the 2003, I guess that was a big year. I didn't know that at all.
I should also say, Andy, sorry. I should, just for completeness of that answer, it also came from Dick Cheney. She was also just like, repeating whatever the administration wanted to see and wanted to talk about on like Meet the Press, the following Sunday. So sorry.
That makes sense. Yeah. I think the fascinating thing about this whole conversation about COVID and biological warfare is, like psychological warfare and other more obscure types of warfare, this is a thing that people don't recognize as happening, but has great effect and impact on their lives. Like, I don't know what's been released into the wild and what's real and what isn't. Obviously, I've seen briefly like random things on X here and there about Lyme's disease. And I knew people growing up who had gotten Lyme's disease, and it completely altered their life and their trajectory. And so it's just something happening kind of beneath the surface, psychological stuff too, as well, like with phones and computers and TVs and advertisements and things like that. This is like you can easily hypnotize people using these devices, and people don't even know it. It's just, I think it's interesting that this stuff was just happening underneath the surface in a lot of ways. A lot of people didn't notice it, and they didn't think anything of it. And in some ways, I get that, because what are you going to do? Like, when you find out there's biological warfare and they're like tampering with organisms and they're going to like put viruses, like, you're like, I can't do anything about that. Like, where am I supposed to go? Nature is everywhere and they're just destroying it. So, you can't freak out about it, but this does seem to be like a significant step toward something a lot darker. I don't really know what that is. I think we're still moving towards that, probably one world government or whatever. I don't know what it is, but it's step towards something darker. Is that we're doing, like, war just used to be everybody lines up and shoots each other, and then that's kind of what it was. And now it's like this weird, sophisticated, multifaceted, strange psychological, biological thing involving so many moving parts that nobody can keep track of it all, and it's just happening. Is that accurate? Like, is that all happening in that time frame? And Fauci kind of grabbed onto that and rode that wave into 2020?
Yeah, well, I think when it comes to biological weapons, not a lot of people were paying attention because the U.S. signed the Biological Weapons Convention. Nixon signed it in '73 or something like that. Yeah. So it's like not at top of mind for most people, understandably, right. And I think logically. And it wasn't until something terrible happened that we realized that while we do not have an offensive biological weapons program, we do have a lot of civilian virologists making things that in another context could be used as a bioweapon. And some of it was being done, apparently, according to recent declassified documents, on behalf of the intelligence community with contracts from the intelligence community. And a lot of the scientists who were doing this work were, simultaneously advising the intelligence community. And so it looks like offensive biological weapons production by another name to me, in my opinion. But people were not aware of it. I think the closest it got to a lot of public awareness was with those 2012 experiments in the Netherlands and in your backyard in Madison, with the 50% fatal airborne flu. But even then, it was sort of a health story. I don't know that it got a ton of attention beyond that.
So the Senate hearing happened, and I mean, one, I don't think I even asked you, like, what were the main takeaways, because I don't know if there are main takeaways other than the fact that he just pled the fifth the whole freaking time and couldn't tell you what the floor color was or whatever. So let's just skip that question. What's going to come of that? What's going to come of these hearings? Because it seems like Fauci's kind of thinks he's above all of this and can do whatever he wants.
Well, there's going to be a vote to hold him in contempt next week sometime. I think we're really in legally unprecedented waters here, with an unconditional pardon and someone who refuses to answer questions about a pandemic that upended millions of lives. So there's really no playbook for this. So at the risk of making a fool of myself by making some prediction, I'm just going to say I have no idea where it goes from here. I do know that we'll get some more documents, I think, from the NIH and regarding that CIA connection that I've been reporting on. Hopefully on the origins question itself, I think there's a lot of intelligence that has not yet been made public, especially from the FBI and the CIA, regarding what information that they had on the pandemic that has not yet seen the light of day. So that's what I'm hoping. I'm hoping for more records.
So I don't know if we've clarified this yet. Probably not, I guess. Where exactly did the COVID come from, and what exactly was it for? Because I know we talked about, like, the relationship with China and all of this, and there's different theories. Some people think it literally originated in the United States and was used as a biological weapon, like against us from our own government, or in China. So what are the theories? Let's just ask that. What are the theories? And then what do you think actually happened as far as COVID?
I am not fully up to speed on all of the theories.
Yeah, it's like a million.
I got asked about the Wuhan military games that happened in the fall recently, and I said, maybe, but I think the strongest evidence is elsewhere. So I'll just give you the case that I think for which the strongest evidence exists. So there is this US-China grant proposal called the Diffuse Proposal. It was submitted to DARPA, which is the R&D division of the Pentagon. And in this proposal, the scientists, including people your audience may have heard of, including EcoHealth Alliance President Peter Daszak, University of North Carolina virologist Ralph Baric, probably the #1 coronavirus engineering expert in the world. They said, we are going to try to find, the next SARS outbreak, SARS 2.0, you might say. We're going to look for SARS 2.0. So we're going to find things that are close enough to SARS to be dangerous, but far enough that our existing vaccines and therapeutics will not work. So what they were looking for is SARS-related coronaviruses with about a 20% difference in this receptor binding domain. And they said, we're going to take these, SARS 2.0 potential viruses, and we're going to check what might make them a pandemic virus. And one of the things that they proposed is inserting polybasic cleavage sites at the S1, S2 boundary of the spike protein. Specifically a furin cleavage site, which is a mutation that when furin is present, cleaves open the spike protein and allows the virus to infect a cell. So they proposed that in 2018. They submitted to DARPA through my organization or prior organization, US Right to Know. I obtained via FOIA the drafts of that proposal. And in the drafts of that proposal, in the margins, they said a couple of things. They said
kill everybody, take over government.
Well, they said, so we're a little worried about DARPA not liking the Chinese aspect of this proposal because they were going to do it with the Wuhan Institute of Virology. So we're going to tell the Pentagon, we're going to tell DARPA that we're going to do this at Ralph Baric's lab in North Carolina. But really, we're going to do a lot of these assays, aka tests. We're going to do a lot of these tests in Wuhan.
So why do they want to do them in Wuhan?
That's a great question. The documents don't get into motive, but some of the scientists that I talked to at the time I reported this mentioned the fact that in Wuhan, it was a lower biosafety level. So it's less of a pain. You don't have to put on the spacesuit.
Yeah.
You could do it more quickly at a lower biosafety level. You don't have to worry about American regulations. It's like any other industry that outsources to China, right?
Yeah.
You don't have to deal with American regulations.
There's no rules. Have the kids do it. Yeah. No, I get it.
Yeah. It's like toys made with lead, but a bioweapon.
Right.
Yeah. So
are these people psychotic though? I'm sorry. Are they insane? I can't even, I don't know. That's not a good question. You don't know, but they seem insane to me. Why are we doing this stuff?
Yeah, I don't know. Well, they say in the margins of the grant proposal, we know US scientists will freak out if they know that we're going to do this at this very low biosafety level in China. So we're going to, not say that in our grant proposal.
Yeah.
So, that's in 2018, they submit this grant proposal. And then in late 2019, early 2020, what do we get? We get SARS-CoV-2, otherwise known as SARS 2.0. So these guys were looking for SARS 2.0. They said, we're going to tell our intended funders that we're going to do it in the US, but actually export it to Wuhan. And then, a year and a half later, the very virus that they were proposing on creating, SARS 2.0, ends up in Wuhan. And actually, Xi Jinping, the head coronavirus virologist at the Wuhan Institute of Virology, this has not gotten a lot of attention. But my former organization, US Right to Know, reported that she really opposed calling it SARS-CoV-2 because it sounded a lot like SARS. Well, I presume because it sounded a lot like SARS 2.0. And I think that could have implicated her.
Yeah, you got to change the branding and everything.
Yeah, exactly.
Change the branding as a marketing move. This is, part of me was, I'm always skeptical to do podcasts on COVID, and I've done a lot of them, but I'm always like, how much more evil do I want to know and understand and consume? Because it's so evil. Obviously, these people had motives. I'm not sure we can exactly know what their motives were, but this just sounds to me like either it's just stupidity where they're like, they're just like tampering with things. And I don't think it's stupidity. I mean, do you think that these people have like extremely dark motives? Do you think they're just trying to kill people? That's what I think. So like the scientist in North Carolina, like what's the point of all that? I just don't get what the point of this is. Maybe this is just, I'm a conservative and I'm sort of like, don't look for the thing, don't do it, don't spend money on it, stop it. That's kind of my attitude towards most things. But like, do you know at all what the motives of these people are? Obviously, we know a little bit about Fauci, but the scientists in North Carolina, I don't remember their names. Like, what were they? They were trying to like explain that a little bit, what their motives are, if you can.
Yeah, I mean, this is a little bit outside my wheelhouse as a reporter and not a psychologist, but definitely
but you're a person, and I mean, you're reading this stuff, and you're like, these people are crazy. Like when you read Anthony Fauci's diary, you get the sense that he's absolutely insane. And, he's crazy. He thinks about himself 24/7. He writes down every single little TV show that he went on. He has a crush on, I think, Angelina Jolie or something like that. I think he mentions that at one point. Like, he's just insane. And it seems like for some odd reason, everybody in the medical world has that sort of narcissistic. It almost seems like the guys who made the atomic bomb, there's this narcissistic, like, we're above nature, we control nature, we can determine the outcome of reality, and there's a God complex with these people. And I don't understand how you can get to that place mentally. And I'm just wondering, as you've read through these documents, have you picked up on, like, these guys are all just narcissistic, God complex psychopaths? Is that, I'm saying that, so I'm just asking if you agree with that.
I think Oppenheimer was much more introspective
I agree.
And plumbed the depths of his soul and the consequences of what he had done. I don't get the sense that virologists have done the same, at least from the communications that I've seen. It's possible that privately, obviously not Fauci, but privately, maybe that they are wrestling with it. Right. But I think the incentives to do this highly risky research are exciting publications that really prestigious journals might be interested in publishing, and the fact that the head of the most massive funder of infectious diseases research on Earth, Anthony Fauci, personally put his gravitas behind this thing and said it's important. It's also, I mean, some of these guys, I'm thinking of Barrick in particular, are really brilliant. And I think part of it is a, like, look what I can do impulse to sort of stretch the limits of human capacity. Like, how deadly can we make this thing? Mm-hmm. I mean, he came up with a technology to ensure that people could not detect that it was a man-made virus. I can't think of a single practical application for that. I think that is an instance of look what I can do and showing off and hubris. Yeah. And I have learned a lot through reporting on this and the blowback that I've gotten from the virology community, specifically about the toxicity of academia and how it incentivizes pathological behavior.
I'm just going to say this from the perspective, like, I've interviewed tons of scholars, and not in the scientific realm. I'd stay away from that as much as I possibly can, but philosophy, theology, psychology, and some of them are great, and a lot of the ones that I have on are great. But in just academia itself, the idea of it is insane. If you think about it, you just sit there and you think about stuff, and you don't interact with the natural world at all. And the whole point of learning is to understand what's happening in the real world. So if you sit in an ivory tower all day long, surrounded by people who are sycophants and kiss your ass all day and tell you how great you are, your ideas are going to, like, be a direct result of that. Obviously, you're going to start trying to form society into that. It's satanic, really, at its core, I think. But anyways, I'm just saying, like, I can confirm people in the theological realm, people who are supposed to be Christians, I'm saying that with air quotes, are the exact same way. Like, they sit there and they produce the dumbest stuff I've ever read in my life. And I read theology all the time. There's the stuff coming out today, the new stuff is 95% useless, mostly regurgitation of prior theologians who said it better. And then you talk to them, and they're so arrogant and full of themselves. And it's like, you're not even that smart. Anyways, I just want to say, as somebody who talked to a lot of scholars, your characterization is 100% correct. I think these people are the most arrogant people ever, and they should all go become farmers so that they can understand the world a little bit better. So that's my rant.
Useful to society. No, I'm just kidding. I mean,
right,
they're great.
100%. No, you're not. That's not a joke. It's the truth.
Yeah.
We don't have. That's 100% true. Like, scholars used to be. Like, they used to kind of do both things, or I guess the real thinkers used to actually interact with the real world. The most, I don't know, useful people in society are the people who can come in and, like, unclog my drain. You know, what's a scholar going to do? They're going to, like, write a book about something nobody cares about. But when we want to build a house or something, we're going to call the Amish. Like, those guys know, like, there's a different subset of knowledge that is actually important. And what these people are doing in academia and the institutions that they surround themselves with, it produces hubris. It produces pride, because they're not interacting with average people in the real world. And I think that that's exactly what it does. And I do think that we should make them all do like 1 or 2 years of farming maybe like set up a system where you can do 4 years of teaching, 2 years of farming. And I think we would get a lot better results.
I like that theory.
Try to implement that. Yeah.
I think there's something there to your theory about just sort of like the social isolation of academia producing negative results. I also wonder, as information becomes more widely accessible, if that means that the people going into academia aren't necessarily the brightest, because everyone sort of has access to information now and can self-educate. Maybe it's the people who couldn't crack it in the private sector. I don't know. I am not enough of a scholar in theories about education.
Stop that. But you're right. You're right. That's exactly what it is. I don't know anybody. I gotta be careful. Yeah, I don't think I know anybody. Whatever. I'm just going to say it and see what happens. I don't know anybody who I know in my personal life who went to college, who got out of college, and they know more. They don't. And they tell me, they're like, I have no idea. I don't know why I was there for 4 years. I was stupid. It was a waste of time. I regret it. They have a bunch of debt. And to your point, the younger people that are going to college now, I think you can prove that they attract the less intelligent people because of the diversity, equity, and inclusion mandates. And that doesn't mean that like certain races are less intelligent. It means that you have to turn away actually intelligent people to meet a quota. So literally dumber people are getting in and smarter people are getting turned away. And that's having its own problem. Sorry, I got to stop cutting you. It just bothers me. Yeah.
No, it's something that I've thought a lot about just as I've tussled with people who I used to have a lot of respect for. And I'm like, oh, you're like actually a massive bully. How do you have this really prestigious position and all of these accolades? But I think what I was talking about NIH and it not having a good return on investment, I think that trickles down to the universities too. So you're not, let's just say, I think we should take a close look at the fact that so much of our biomedical research is funded by the government. But this is not my expertise. I would love, if you did a podcast with an expert in education policy, I would love to know more about why our academics are so messed up.
Well, it's
very interested.
It's the bureaucracy. I mean, you can't bite the hand that feeds you. And then the reality, it's sort of I don't know, self-fulfilling prophecy, circular logic, whatever we want to call this. It's basically the ideas that are going to be produced out of an education system that is directly fed by the federal government are going to be ideas that directly feed the federal government. It's just circular knowledge. It's point. You're not going to ever work outside. Very few people are going to say, hey, smaller government, let's stop spending money on stupid research. They're all going to say, we need more money. We need more grants. Well, there's a particular philosophical presupposition that undergirds that, which is sort of the Marxist nihilistic assumption, which basically just says a larger government can essentially be your God and it'll continue to provide for you. And they're going to teach that to people. That's why 97% of our college professors are liberals or Democrat. I mean, they vote for one party. Like, you don't actually have thought. You have a system that's feeding itself, because if it doesn't, then it suffocates and dies, and they're not going to kill themselves. That's like not in their self-interest. People are selfish. And so I think it's pretty obvious. And the only way to stop this perpetual downslide into hell, which is what we're doing societally right now, is by, I literally think the core of the problem is the education system. We need to get rid of it 100%, which is never going to happen. And I get that. People, that's never going to happen. You're right. And that's why we're going to die as a civilization. Yeah, go ahead.
Apparently they're getting rid of the Department of Education, although I think there might be sort of an internal debate there between the true believers, the people who really believe we need to take a sledgehammer to this thing, and sort of the people who are a little squishy on that.
Yeah.
But definitely at the NIH, people are being awfully squishy about the fact that organization needs massive reform. It caused a pandemic probably. And
but shouldn't we just get rid of it? I don't know if it needs reform. Like, shouldn't we just be done with this stuff? Like, I think this has been a almost 80-year experiment in all of these new agents, 100-year, government agency doing all this crap, the CIA, all this stuff. It's been an experiment for about 100 years. And it seems to me that the outcome is way, way, way negative. There's like no positive that's come out of this. Potentially, probably, United States presidents have been killed. They're like, this is a big problem. All of these 3-letter agencies. So I don't know. Like, it just seems like we just get rid of it. Like, I don't know.
At the very least, we should be debating it. And I think those debates are just forbidden in DC. Like every person outside of the Beltway understands, like, we need to take a serious look at the intelligence agencies and audit, like, are they helping national security?
They'll kill you if you try to do that.
And we can't even talk about it, Right. Is government funding the best way that we can get medical advances? You can't even talk about canceling like a certain subset of grants. It's forbidden. So DC has a wonderful way of completely exiling the actually meaningful discussions. It's really, right. Really amazing.
It is amazing. It is amazing. And I think it's obviously indicative of our time, but I think also, just to your point about, these government agencies, like, not even be able to have the conversation, even outside of that, I know Republican conservative people who work in industries that are entirely subsidized by the government or whatever, they're never going to vote in favor of that either. Like the whole idea with Trump bringing out the union guy, I can't remember what his name was, at the 2024 Republican National Convention, the union, I don't know what his name, he looked like a mobster. Do you know what I'm talking about?
I do know what you're talking about, and his name escapes me too, but.
Yeah, but it was, so they brought out the union guy. Republicans have been against unions forever, and they didn't bring out a Christian, like there was no Christian, no pro-life or anything like that, but the unions were there. And it's like, okay, that was that's like the whole problem. The whole problem is that the only way that you can win these people over is by basically accepting all of their economic and philosophical presuppositions. You're going to lose the core of what the party was, which I think we lost that a long time ago. But, part of the Republican sort of, and I'm not even fully free market capitalist, I don't agree with all that, but part of that idea is the more the government gets involved, the more compromised everybody is in the situation. And so people aren't going to vote against their own interest. And to tell people to vote in favor of getting rid of unions now, it's like, well, now you lose a voting block and you're probably not going to win the next election or whatever, I don't know. I'm sorry. I probably just sound catastrophic, but that's what I think is going on.
It's great to hash it out. Again, these are not the discussions that are like really animating floor debates in the Congress, although I think they should be, Yeah. And yeah, it's highly relevant to the COVID origins issue because virologists were, and Anthony Fauci were the people we trusted to give us the answers on where this thing came from. And it turns out a lot of the evidence pointed to something that, if fully acknowledged, would eviscerate their careers, because it would have come from the sort of research that they do. And that, of course, colored their analysis.
Yes.
So
can we, just to finish this off, I want to talk about pardoning people who have never committed crimes or who have never been convicted for crimes. They definitely committed crimes. That's a thing that we're doing now in the United States. So, did that happen prior to Biden very often?
I thought it was completely unprecedented. I could be wrong on that. But I think it's probably the first pardon for, a specified number of years for unspecified crimes. And it probably, wasn't written by a human hand. So there's
That's true.
sort of legal question also.
But I read somewhere, and this could be wrong, that Trump, one of the reasons why Trump isn't going after this whole Fauci thing as hard as he should be, well, is one, because he thinks the vaccine was the most amazing thing ever, which is ridiculous. But two, is that he wants to do some of these pardons once he's done. So he wants to pardon people who haven't been convicted of crimes. Have you seen any of that? Or do you feel like this is going to be something that is perpetuated, that this is going to be the new norm? You just pardon everybody, like your whole family and everything, because that's what you're doing nowadays?
I hope not. I hadn't heard that. That's an interesting theory. My sense is that he hasn't been as out in front on the Fauci issue, just because there's the complex legacy on Operation Warp Speed, and also because it's not as important to him as other issues that, say, Tulsi Gabbard at the ODNI was working on, like election interference. So I think his primary interest was the 2020 election, and that probably has an effect of crowding out some of his interest in the COVID origins Fauci issue.
Yeah, that's frustrating. That's just annoying to me, because obviously I think the 2020 election there were problems there, but I think that killing a bunch of people with a man-made virus is a little bit more important. So the Trump administration is a little bit off. I'm not very happy with them. They seem to be,
Obviously, my bailiwick is the COVID origins issue. I want maximal disclosures. I think, Gabbard really pushed at the end there, but unfortunately their time was somewhat abbreviated, and I just don't get the sense that it is a top priority for the president.
Yeah, that makes sense. Final question. How is this going to affect the 2028 elections as far as the medical freedom? People, just basically what we were just talking about, Trump and his administration doesn't seem to be very interested in this issue. And I talked to Ron Johnson on this podcast, and he said the same thing. He's like, most Republicans kind of just get angry when you bring it up. And so how's that going to affect 28? Because those people arguably won him the election in 2024.
I hope, well, I shouldn't get into my own political beliefs, but I did notice today that Joe Kent tweeted something about his disappointment with the Trump administration on two issues. The Iran war and accountability for Fauci. So I think there is a growing understanding within the Republican tent that this coalition that helped win the election in 2024, that included a lot of America Firsters. And, I guess the definition of America First has changed somewhat from February when we launched this war.
Now it's like Nick Fuentes, isn't it? Yeah, that's like his thing.
Oh, well, I think he appropriated it. It actually goes back to World War I. But if you're sort of skeptical of foreign intervention, you might have been attracted to the Trump campaign in 2024. And also, if you were in the medical freedom movement or were otherwise sort of burned by the COVID pandemic, you were also, maybe attracted to the Trump campaign with Kennedy's endorsement. And I think there is a growing understanding of how powerful that coalition could be if it becomes a real political force. Unfortunately, there are no, it's anti-establishment basically by nature. So there are no institutions. I mean, I think they're growing now, but there isn't that same infrastructure to support that political coalition in the way that there is for like the standard Democratic Party or like the standard, sort of Reaganite Republican Party. So how powerful it will actually be in the long term remains to be seen. But to your question, I think it was interesting too, I should mention, at the Fauci hearing, there were a lot of young people. There was a lot of Gen Z there. And I think that there's...
because they ruin these people's lives. Gen Z didn't go to school. You got to get the vaccine at 20 years old. You're jacked with a 6-pack. You can't go to McDonald's. Screw you. That's stupid. Yeah.
So I think the idea that the Maha coalition can just be kind of waved away, which I think is the attitude of some people in the White House. I don't think that's right. I think Gen Z is still pissed about COVID. I think people still are disillusioned with the corruption of our healthcare institutions, and that coalition, of skeptical of foreign intervention and Maha could be powerful. But also the people, the massive amounts of money and lobbies who are opposed to that coalition are very powerful too. So it remains to be seen, but I definitely hope it shapes the race in some way. So
yeah. Well, Emily Kopp, thanks for doing this. Thanks for talking and reporting.
This was so fun. The time flew by. Thank you so much.
Yes.